And welcome to Outside 50. I'm Wayne Kraska, and with me is Rick Shaibani in California. Hey, Rick.
How you doing, Kras?
Pretty good. Rick, today we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the USA footy season this year. There is so much going on, and if anyone would like to read our article on usfootynews.com, we have a bit of a rundown about some of the things that is going on around the USA.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good season, I reckon. Obviously, we've got the usual suspects: Central Regionals, Eastern Regionals, Western Regionals, about halfway through the year, or June and July, and got a few invitational tournaments, some old, some new, and we have the camps for the Revos and the Freedom as well. So it's still going to be a pretty busy calendar, and we finish it all out in my backyard in Norco, California for nationals on the weekend of October 10th and 11th.
Yeah, certainly. It's going to be a huge year. So let's touch on the Revo and Freedom camps. The Revo camp at the moment is in Houston on February 28th to March 1st. And there's a Freedom camp in Sacramento, May 28th to the 31st. They're the lead up to, as Rick alluded to, the International Cup in Australia on the Sunshine Coast, starting in July 25th and going all the way through to August 8th. And that'll be somewhat different for many of the teams, obviously, playing on the Sunshine Coast for the first time, where normally that tournament has been held down in Melbourne in the cold climes of a mid-Melbourne winter.
Yeah, that's going to be a nice little change of pace, I reckon. Obviously, there's a new facility up on the Sunshine Coast, up in Maroochydore, Queensland, and this is the first type of international event they've had up there, from what I hear, and it should be really fun. And of course, you got Papua New Guinea, who won it all back in 2017 for the men, and Ireland for the women. I believe the U.S. placed fourth on both sides last time, and it should be another really competitive tournament this year as well. And here in LA, it's actually really cool for us because this time around we have 3 players on the Freedom and 3 on the Revos. So it's going to be nice to see some familiar faces and see them go at it down in Queensland.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And we're going to have the Revos coach, Tom Ellis, and the Freedom coach, Christine Licata, on the podcast very, very soon. So look out to that, one of the next episodes, maybe as early as next week. So it's going to be a very big year for a lot of players that are in those squads, going to the Freedom camp and the Revo camps, and then making their way all the way down to Australia and a very sunny Queensland environment, I hope.
Oh, definitely. It's going to be a really exciting one, and all the best to the Revos and the Freedom. And it'll be great to have Tom and Christina on, hopefully soon, fingers crossed. So can't wait.
Yeah, we got a lot of other events that the USAFL are backing this year, and some of them are familiar, as you said, and some of them are new. March 28th is the return of the Rob Dollar tournament in Phoenix, Arizona. Normally, the Arizona teams, I believe, participate in that, and the Dragons and maybe another team from the West Coast, Rick?
Yeah, potentially. I know Vegas has been there in previous years. I wasn't there last year because I was in Australia, but yeah, it's a big deal. It kind of kicks off our Metro season over here, and it's also just a big deal to all of us in the Dragons because David Dollar, Rob's brother, is a very good friend of mine. He's been with the Dragons for years. For those who aren't aware, it's named after Rob because he played for both the Arizona Hawks and the LA Dragons for many years. And tragically, a few years back, he was killed while he was riding his bike on South Mountain in Phoenix, killed by a drunk driver. So ever since then, we've done the Cup in his memory, and it's always a really great way to get around each other in LA, Dollar's family, and just encourage them. And it's a really great event on a personal level and on a footy level, of course. So we always look forward to that, and it's going to be a really fun time this year.
Yeah, and all the proceeds go to the Rob Dollar Foundation too, which, if anyone wants to look it up, we have a link on the story on US Footy News.
Yeah, it's robdollarfoundation.org, and it's dedicated primarily to cycling safety.
Awesome. A week later, there's a brand new event down in the southeast called the Savannah Aussie Rules Invitational. The Savannah team last year held an event, one of their first games down around the same time of the year. And this year's event will most likely attract teams from South Florida, like Fort Lauderdale and Tampa, as well as Jacksonville, who were a new team last year. Atlanta is likely to be down there as well, but it's also, I believe, an open invitation for anyone, women's teams and men's teams, who want to go down to very beautiful and historic Savannah and play a game of footy on a weekend. It's again, it's on May 2nd, and a brand new event that's been supported by the USAFL, which is great.
What a great opportunity. I mean, it's obviously, I know that's near and dear to your heart, Kraz, because you guys have really helped out Jacksonville and Savannah since they started as clubs. And so I reckon that'll be a really good event. Great way for some new clubs to get some exposure. And like you said, it's a great way to just have anyone come down and give it a crack, even if it's just a few players from other clubs. And hopefully that's a big success down there in May.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a 12s tournament, I believe, at the moment, but you know how that can be adapted to whatever team sizes that participate.
Definitely.
And a week later, so we have a very busy late March, early May season. A week later is the 80-35 tournament in Des Moines, Iowa. Now, this tournament last year was very well attended, with Minnesota, Chicago, Wisconsin. I believe some Denver teams there as well. So I would imagine at that time of the year it might be a little cool still in Des Moines, but it's been a very popular event for quite a few teams.
Oh, definitely. And the Midwest kind of gets overlooked sometimes, but there are some great teams up there. You got Minnesota, who's obviously very good in Div 2, men's and women's. Chicago's always got some really solid players. Des Moines does too, of course. And whenever Denver's involved, there's bound to be some quality competition. So that's really exciting tourney, and definitely something to look forward to for you guys out in the Midwest.
And to round out the tournaments before we get into regionals, on June 6th is a tournament in Cascadia, outside of Seattle, Washington. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, the Cascadia Cup. And you assume that Portland, Seattle, maybe a few Canadian teams will get in on that. It's I have a few friends who are from the Seattle club or have been involved with the Seattle club in the past, and they've grown really fast. They, of course, made it up to Div 1 this past year at Nationals. So they've got some really good numbers up there and more than enough talent and more than enough uh, infrastructure, for lack of a better term, to host a tournament like that. So that should be fun. And of course, it's June in Seattle, so it's probably not going to rain, hopefully. So, yeah.
Well, we'll see about that. Portland and Seattle also have two of the strongest women's teams in the country as well. So I'm sure it'll be a very big event for them leading into regionals, which is the month after, well, later in the month, actually. The regionals this year are in Arlington, Texas, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Denver, Colorado. And as we mentioned on usfootynews.com, they are all teams or locations that the USAFL signify as being in the Central Division. This probably for some gets a little confusing because a team like Cincinnati, who is hosting the Eastern Regionals, is actually in the Central Division and will play in the Eastern Regionals this year, as is Denver, who are normally in the Central Division but will play in the Western Division. So a little confusing this year, but as it's been explained to us, that the regions that the USAFL have are basically just guidelines, and because they cover such a massive area of the country, it is not unusual that these tournaments would be a little different from year to year. The other aspect of that is that these tournaments are now put out for bid by cities' sports and recreation departments, and cities must put in an application to host them. That probably limits the field somewhat to what cities are available to host these events, to have the facilities available, to have a decent sized city with an incoming airport obviously is important, and hotels and everything that goes into these events. So it's going to be an interesting year with all these 3 tournaments all in the one particular region, but at the same time, it appears to be solidifying this program of regional tournaments for the USAFL.
Yeah, it's going to be, I'll be honest, it's a little unorthodox, but like you said, it's kind of good to be able to have a bit of flexibility. And it's really cool. I actually didn't know that, Kraz, that different cities are having to, apply or place bids. And I assumed it was just a case of ground availability because, only certain cities potentially have those size fields for, 4, 5, 6 footy ovals all next to each other. But it's going to be good. And it's funny, ironically, of course, Denver's in the central region now, but they were in the western region previously. And so back in 2017, I believe it was, they hosted regionals when they were still in the western region. So as for us at the Dragons, we're lucky to have some experience up there in Westminster. It's a beautiful area, real wide open space, great view of the mountains. And of course, the high elevation's a big factor up there. But after 10 minutes of huffing and puffing, you kind of get used to it. So it should be fun. And personally, I have some friends up in Denver who hopefully will be able to get down there and catch a few games.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks with the regionals rolling through. Um, the final event and the main event of the season for everyone often is the National Championships. Now, Rick, you mentioned earlier that they're in the Norco area of California. You'll have to explain me what you consider the Norco area. I always see it, the USAFL are listing as in Ontario, California. So explain to our listeners whereabouts this tournament is and how long it's going to take everyone to get there, and how do they get there?
Well, yeah, it's about 2 hours outside of LA, with or without traffic. It's roughly that distance. Norco and Ontario are both suburbs of Riverside. Of course, when you talk about LA and the surrounding areas, there's LA, which is obviously the city of LA and most of LA County. And then you've got Orange County, of course. Then you got San Diego below that. And then to the east of LA and to the northeast of OC, you've got Riverside County. So basically, Ontario and Norco are in Riverside County. And it's basically like more or less a straight shot down I-10 or, a couple other highways that go that way. So from LAX, like when you fly in, it's about a 2.5 hour drive. So it's not too bad, all things considered. And I know for a fact there are some good hotels out in the Ontario area and Riverside. So it should be pretty good. And according to the Dragons, again, I was in Australia last year, but the Dragons actually played a few Metro games out in Riverside, which we do because Riverside is like a satellite club that is incorporated into us for the regular season. In Metro season, you've got 2 LA sides, Riverside, San Diego, and OC. So we have quite a few good ties out in Riverside, and we're considering it basically a home tournament, even though I think technically OC is hosting because they're closer. But yeah, we're obviously really excited about it. We did San Diego a couple of years back, which is also driving distance, and only a little bit further. It's about 3 hours down to San Diego. So about slightly less to Ontario.
There is a little airport there at Ontario, I believe. Well, little by someone else's standards, probably, but checking flights at the moment, they're a little bit more expensive than the regular. Obviously, not doesn't get as much traffic, but it's probably an option for some people if they get the right booking frame time of the year to be able to fly straight into Ontario.
Potentially, yeah. And you've also got John Wayne Airport down in Orange County. So, I mean, I can't really speak to what would necessarily be cheaper. You never really know with flights like that, especially in October. But it's definitely something to be mindful of. And I reckon a few clubs will pursue or look into pursuing flying into other areas because it's from Orange County up to Riverside. It's slightly closer, probably about like an hour, hour and a half. So depending on where you fly into, it could definitely be easier to access it that way. And there is an airport in Ontario, Riverside area, so that could also be an option. But again, you never really know. Whatever's economically feasible for whichever club. So, but it'll be fun, and obviously we're jacked up. We're really excited to uh, again have it in our own backyard in LA. So
Yeah, as I mentioned on that usfootynews.com, it's the San Diego National Championships was the biggest on record by far. I would not expect this one in California again to be anything different. Certainly, I believe we were running 6 fields at the same time in San Diego. So hopefully that facility is large enough to take a similar type of tournament. I think there was over 80 games played in 2 days, which is just absolutely amazing. It's just a lot of everything,
mm,
goalposts, a lot of umpires, a lot of water carriers, a lot of boundary marking, and just the total amount of organisation to get something like that done in 2 days is pretty amazing. So not hard to imagine it is the biggest Aussie rules football tournament outside of Australia and probably anywhere else in the world as well. So, including Australia, I don't know of a tournament in Australia that hosts 40, 40 clubs and 50 plus teams. So it's going to be a huge one.
yeah, definitely. And obviously, we don't have to worry about bad weather because it'll most likely be about 70, 75 Fahrenheit for us down there, which will be fun. And yeah, San Diego, that was unforgettable. Like, obviously, there was we had those massive polo fields, and the infrastructure was great. We had so many great fields, and the quality of the turf was great. So, and based on what everything I've seen from the Norco facility, it's going to be very similar. And hopefully, it all goes smoothly and it's a big success.
Yeah, certainly. Looking forward to that one. Before we leave, as this podcast will be out before the end of the week, we have a game coming up this weekend, actually in Florida. It is the Tampa Bay Sharks are playing the Fort Lauderdale Squids over in Fort Myers, Florida, which is somewhere in between the two cities. For those that are not
I believe it's in. I believe it's near Naples or something like that. So Southwest
Yeah,
Florida.
Fort Myers is a little north of Naples and somewhat closer for both teams to travel to, which is interesting because Fort Lauderdale, which is on the far east coast, and Tampa is on the Gulf side of the Florida Peninsula. They are about 4 hours apart. Even though it looks like a small distance, it is still quite a drive. So it's interesting to see that they're meeting in a mutual beneficial place for a game, which will be the first USAFL game of the year. There has been another game I did notice, but it was a Metro game. The Seattle Grizzlies have already played a Metro game, and it's on the USAFL website as and scored. So that's good to see. Would have been a little chilly up there in Seattle, but that was played in January, I believe.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see that. Again, Seattle has grown so quickly, and from what I hear, they've also been playing some metro matches out in Hawaii. The Hawaii Eagles are, of course, also relatively new, and they're going to be playing Calgary. Calgary is going to be going down there later this month, I believe. And also, Hawaii actually reached out to a handful of clubs out west. They're still piecing together their schedule, and they're willing to host. So fingers crossed on that. I know the Dragons' schedule isn't officially out yet, but hopefully we could make a trip to the islands. And with what you were saying with Tampa, they're a new club, and Fort Lauderdale, who have my all-time favorite nickname, by the way, the Fighting Squids. I know Fort Lauderdale's kind of been on and off the radar. Like they've, kind of struggled to put together a full team at nationals, but it's good to see they're still at it, and they're helping a new club in Tampa, and that should be a good contest. I'm not sure if it's 9-a-side or 12-a-side or whatever, but hopefully they get some good numbers and some new recruits as well.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to play the game in January. I'm sure some of the listeners who are in the northern clubs are probably a little envious at the moment, but that's why you've got to come down to the south and enjoy your footy while you can,
Or LA.
or over to LA. Yes, with Rick is. All right, Rick. Before we move on to our first guest for the day, well, actually our only guest, make sure you look out for our future podcasts. As we mentioned, we're talking to the Freedom coach Christine Licata and the Revo coach Tom Ellis in the next few days, and look forward to that and plenty more happening as we progress through these podcasts. If you'd like to contact us, just simply drop us an email at usfootynews@gmail.com and we'll get you on and we'll have a chat. So up next is our guest for today, and it is Rob Montanaro from the Baton Rouge Tigers. And the Baton Rouge Tigers have been around a fairly long time, and we welcome Rob.
Doing well, Kraz. How are you?
Pretty fine, pretty fine. So, Rob, down in Baton Rouge, you're a long way from both of us, and you've been involved with the Baton Rouge team now for, what I know, a fairly long time. What year did the Tigers start, and how did it all start?
Yeah, we started in 2004. I moved to Baton Rouge in 2000. Had spent 3 years bouncing around the US, and there was a small group of Aussies, and there was a girl who actually had a shop called Aussie Traders, who was the focal point for Aussies in Baton Rouge. Once a month we'd get together at a pub just around the corner from her place, and just a few of us were talking, just having a beer and talking, and were saying how we really missed having a kick of the footy. There were three of us, and one of the guys said, well, there's a national league. And we're like, no. This was back in 2004, like I said. And so we did a little research and reached out to US Footy. They sent us a little starter kit, and we kind of fired up from there.
Wow, a starter kit. I haven't heard of those for a long time. So down there in Baton Rouge is the LSU campus. How have you gone with recruiting from, I guess, community?
Yeah, so it's got its highs and lows. It's always a challenge. My personal view is that the teams that do the best recruiting are ones that have a fresh influx of internationals on a fairly regular basis, because then you'll get a new Aussie come into town. He'll be working in a different office or a different group. He'll spread the word, and he'll bring in some new people, and then they'll bring in some of their friends. Baton Rouge is not that kind of city. It's a medium-sized city, but it's not a very international city. So the Aussies that do come through get a few students, but they don't stay long. and then you get people who tend to come here for work and stay. So we've had a bit of a challenge spreading the word, because unless you know someone and they come and get to know you, that's often where you get the recruits. Just randomly starting up a conversation with someone, it's a little hard to explain the game to people who never knew it, didn't grow up playing it. So the first question is, about pads. The second question is it rugby? And then you spend a lot of time explaining it. And then it's very hit and miss as to whether they'll actually come out.
Oh yeah, as a Yank, I can definitely relate to that. Just explaining it to Americans who have no idea what I'm talking about, and yeah, and I can definitely understand. Like, obviously Baton Rouge, again, decent sized city, but not a huge metropolitan area. So, given that it's definitely a college town, and of course that's challenging to get Aussies to commit to it, just because of the location and the size. But how do you guys recruit Americans mostly? What's been the best strategy for
Good
that?
question. And again, it's kind of across the board. It's 2020. We started the club in 2004, so I've been involved with it since then, 16 years. Everyone that I know, I've tried to recruit many times over. But, you meet new people, and I still probably try and recruit 2 or 3 people a week, just kind of bringing it up. But we do try and do some recruiting at LSU by having at least one training session a week on campus. So we try and get some visuals out there. We put up some flyers where we can, and then any new recruit that we do get, obviously we try and do the word of mouth thing. We do have a sponsor as well, which is a bar which is associated with LSU, Fred's, and so we try and work with them and their media outlets and their social media outlets to try and get the word out.
Cool.
So, Rob, the closest team to you, I had a look on the map, is Houston, and Houston are a fairly new team. So, is that the most popular team that you go and play, and what sort of relationship have you had with them since they came onto the map?
Yeah, so you're right. Houston is about 4 hours, but to the side of Houston that they play at, it's about 5. And we have a great relationship with Houston. Houston has actually come and gone twice since we've been a team. They were a team when we first started, and then they kind of went away for a while and then came back. And under the new management, they've really done very well. But again, part of that, I think, is because there are a bunch of internationals coming through Houston, oil industry, IT industry, and they help bring in new players. So we try and get with them a couple of times a year, 2 or 3 times there or here, and they're one of our better teams to go and play just because they're closer. Everyone else outside of that, Dallas, Austin, and you guys are all like an 8 to 9 hour drive, whereas Houston's 4 or 5.
Yeah, and obviously, again, with Baton Rouge being the only team in Louisiana right now, have you guys tried to dip down into like New Orleans or Shreveport or any of the other major cities to get recruits, or is that sort of like ongoing?
Great question. Yes, we have. We've even tried to start a sister club down in New Orleans. There's a lot of rugby down there. Obviously, it's a very different game, but occasionally you can tease someone to come across and play. Some of our players from LSU were from New Orleans and went back there, and that's where we tried to get the core of a secondary team or half a team. Unfortunately, you need a central person to be the anchor for a team, and we haven't managed to find that core person to really anchor a New Orleans team. Always looking, always spreading the word. it's just, with traffic, it's a good hour and a half distance. So it's hard to get people from New Orleans to come up and train with us unless it's on a weekend. And even then, you add an hour and a half travel, hour and a half training session, another hour and a half going back. You've lost a good half a day pretty quickly, and people would much prefer to train closer to home than that.
And so looking ahead with Baton Rouge 2020 season, when do training start? First of all, and also, what's the plan for regionals? Are you guys hoping to take a whole team?
It's too early to tell on taking a whole team. We always love to and try and plan to do that. Recruiting, as I said, is a bit of a challenge. So we start the year with high hopes and just kind of see how it develops. We had a first unofficial training session just this past weekend. We had a dozen guys come out, which was good. Our official start of season is the 29th of February because that's the first Saturday after Mardi Gras. It's a little challenging trying to train over winter because of cold weather and daylight. And then Mardi Gras season hits hard and fast, and people are going in lots of different directions and not always willing to get up early on a Saturday morning to come out for a run. So we try and do some advertising and some word of mouth stuff through February, and then as soon as Mardi Gras is done, we try and hit it hard and fast. We've got a tentative game scheduled for the end of March as our first home game. Then we're going to Houston for the Anzac Day, for their Anzac Day game. We're going to try and set up, we have 2 potential Metro League seasons, both 4 and 5 week seasons, before and after the Houston game, the end of April. And then we're going to Dallas for the regionals. I forget that date right now. And that's as far as we've managed to really flesh out because summer hits pretty hard in Louisiana. So it's a challenge to get people to come out and run at that point. So right now our focus is hitting the first half of the season, the spring season, as hard as we can. And then once we've got a better idea on numbers, we'll formulate the second half.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's great. And then obviously Nationals is going to be on the West Coast again this year. So who did you guys combine with last year?
Last year was in Florida, and unfortunately we were not able to put a team in. Often we combine with a Houston B team or sometimes with Atlanta. We have, but the way the season came to fruition last year, we just couldn't pull it together, unfortunately. And that was sad because that was a drivable distance. Getting our team to fly is a little more challenging.
Right. You got anything else for us, Kraz?
No, not really. But thanks, Rob. And I've been a guest of Baton Rouge down there many, many times, and certainly the Atlanta club enjoyed a long history of going to an LSU tailgating after our game on a Saturday afternoon, and there wasn't too many players in our club in Atlanta who didn't think that was the best weekend of the year for obvious reasons. But good luck for the rest of the season, Rob, and we'll look forward to maybe having you back on later on the year and see how you're doing.
Yeah, no, be more than happy to come back. One of the things that we are trying at the moment is, as everyone knows, there have been some horrific bushfires back home. We're doing a little fundraiser through social media and have so far done fairly well. All the funds are going to, we've chosen to go to the volunteer firefighters to try and support them. We've raised about $1,200 so far, and it's going through till our first home game. But but we've gotten some good exposure from it. That's one thing. We're just raising a little bit of awareness, and we're happy for that. But
Awesome.
any kind of raising awareness is what we're out for.
Absolutely. And thankfully, we were able to do a little bit of that over the Australia Day weekend here in LA as well. So it's great to see all the USAFL clubs, getting around it in their own way. So it's awesome.
Well, guys, thanks for your time. You'll take care. And
Thank you, Rob.
Let me know how else I can feed into the whole program.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Rob. Thank you very much.
Outside 50 is brought to you with the help of Play Aussie USA. Play Aussie is the only place in the USA you can buy the famous Sheeran football, a proud sponsor of the USAFL. Visit them at playaussie.com.